The crimson sun beat down mercilessly on the jagged cliffs of Morthak, casting long shadows across the volcanic wasteland that the Kethvar call home. General Thane stood motionless on his command platform, his massive 12-foot frame silhouetted against the burning sky. His obsidian armor, forged from the hardest minerals of his Deathworld, gleamed like polished stone. Around him, the war room buzzed with activity as the subordinates prepared for what they believed would be their easiest conquest yet. The Kethvar had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years, and their method was always the same. They would arrive at a new world, demonstrate their overwhelming physical superiority, and watch as entire civilizations dropped to their knees in terror. It had worked on the crystalline beings of Zephyr Prime, who shattered themselves rather than face Kethvar wrath. It had worked on the gas-dwelling ethereals, who simply vanished into their atmosphere rather than fight. Every species they had ever encountered possessed the basic survival instinct to recognize a superior predator when they saw one. Commander Voss approached the platform, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. Like all Kethvar, his natural carapace could deflect plasma fire, and his razor-sharp claws could tear through reinforced steel as easily as paper. His yellow eyes glowed with anticipation as he activated the holographic display, showing a small blue world spinning peacefully in space. General, our scouts had completed their analysis of the third planet in system designation 47, Voss reported, his mandibles clicking with barely contained excitement. The inhabitants call their world Earth and themselves humans. Their technology is primitive, roughly equivalent to what we encountered on Kelos before we absorbed their civilization. Thane examined the readouts with growing satisfaction. The humans appear to be bipedal creatures, standing barely 6 feet tall at their largest. They possess no natural armor, no claws, no fangs, no apparent defensive capabilities whatsoever. Their bodies looked soft and vulnerable, covered only in thin skin that could probably be pierced by a Kethvar's smallest talon. Most amusing of all, they seemed to spend considerable time fighting among themselves, suggesting they lacked a unity that might pose even a minor challenge. What is their response time to threats? Thane asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Laughably slow, General. Their fastest military response takes several hours, and their weapons appear to be simple projectile-based systems that would barely scratch our armor. Intelligence suggests they have never encountered any species beyond their own world. The General's laughter rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. In 3 millennia of conquest, the Kethvar had never encountered a species quite this defenseless. The crystalline beings at least had energy shields. The ethereals could manipulate gases as weapons. Even the primitive Colossians had possessed natural telepathic abilities that required some consideration. But these humans appear to have evolved without any survival mechanisms whatsoever. "Prepare the war fleet," Thane commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Full deployment. I want every ship in the Armada ready for departure within 2 solar rotations." "General, surely a full deployment is unnecessary for such a weak species," Voss suggested. "A single dreadnought could probably handle their entire planet." Thane's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Commander, do not mistake efficiency for weakness. The Kethvar Empire dominates this galaxy because we never underestimate our enemies, no matter how pathetic they appear. We will arrive with overwhelming force, offer them our standard ultimatum, and when they inevitably surrender, the galaxy will witness once again why we are the apex species." The war room erupted into organized chaos as officers rushed to prepare their forces. Massive dreadnoughts, each capable of reducing a continent to ash, began powering their engines. Thousands of Kethvar warriors checked their weapons and armor, though most doubted they would need either. The humans would likely surrender the moment they witnessed a single Kethvar warrior in person. As the fleet prepared for departure, Thane allowed himself a moment of reflection. Soon, another species would join the long list of civilizations that had bent the knee to Kethvar might. Another world would contribute its resources to the ever-expanding empire. Another victory would be added to his already impressive record. The General had no way of knowing that this small blue world would challenge everything the Kethvar believed about strength, power, and what it truly meant to be the dominant force in the galaxy. He could not have imagined that the soft, defenseless humans would teach his people lessons that would shake their empire to its very foundations. The war fleet departed Morthak with complete confidence, heading toward what they assumed would be the shortest conquest in their military history. The massive Kevvar dreadnoughts descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling mountains, their hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. Across the planet, emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming as governments scrambled to respond to humanity's first contact with an alien species. The ships were unlike anything humans had ever imagined, their dark surfaces bristling with weapons that could level entire cities. General Thane stood in the command center of his flagship as it settled over New York City, crushing several abandoned buildings under its immense weight. Through the viewport, he could see tiny human figures scurrying like insects below. Some fled in panic, but others remained stationary, pointing strange rectangular devices at his ship. He later learned these were called cameras, though the concept of documenting one's own defeat puzzled him greatly. The general expected immediate surrender. Every other species had either fled in terror or sent desperate emissaries begging for mercy within minutes of Kethvar arrival. Instead, something unprecedented happened. A small convoy of human vehicles approached his landing site, moving with what appeared to be deliberate calm rather than panic retreat. Colonel Rebecca Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle, her military uniform crisp despite the chaos surrounding them. She was a compact woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that showed no fear, only careful assessment. Behind her walked a small delegation of humans representing different nations, all maintaining remarkable composure for beings who should have been paralyzed with terror. Thane emerged from his ship, his 12-foot frame casting a shadow over the human delegation. His obsidian armor reflected the city lights, and his yellow eyes burned with the confidence of 3,000 years of unopposed conquest. He had personally overseen the surrender of 47 different species, and each encounter had followed the same predictable pattern. "I am General Thane of the Kethvar Empire," he announced, his voice booming across the landing zone. "Your species will submit immediately to our authority, or face complete annihilation. There are no alternatives. Choose now." Colonel Martinez tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. Then she did something that had never happened in Kethvar history. She smiled. "General Thane, I'm Colonel Rebecca Martinez, representing the United Earth Defense Council. We're here to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to the situation." The general's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Terms? There are no terms. You submit or die. This is the way of the universe." "I'm afraid we'll have to respectfully decline both options," Martinez replied, her tone remaining conversational despite the gravity of the moment. "We prefer to find a third alternative." Before Thane could respond to this incomprehensible statement, the area around his ship erupted into coordinated chaos. What appeared to be panicked civilians suddenly revealed themselves as military personnel. Buildings that seemed empty disgorged soldiers carrying strange weapons. Vehicles that looked abandoned roared to life, moving with impossible speed and precision. Commander Voss watched from his position near the London landing site as similar scenes unfolded across the planet. His warriors, bred for millennia to be perfect killing machines, found themselves struggling against enemies who refused to fight according to any recognizable pattern. These humans used explosives that detonated remotely, vehicles that moved faster than any biological creature should be able to react, and worst of all, they seemed to anticipate every Kethvar tactical move. In Sydney, Captain Jack Thompson led a squad of human soldiers in what should have been a suicide charge against the Kethvar patrol. Instead of the direct confrontation that Kethvar expected, the humans used the urban environment to their advantage, appearing from sewers and rooftops, striking quickly and vanishing before the aliens could respond effectively. But perhaps the most confusing incident occurred in a London suburb, where a young human child named Billy Morrison approached a wounded Kethvar scout named Gorak. The warrior had been separated from his unit during one of the humans' impossible ambushes, and now lay bleeding behind an overturned vehicle. Instead of running away or calling for adult help, Billy carefully approached the massive alien, carrying a small bottle of water and a makeshift bandage torn from his own shirt. Gorak tensed, expecting some kind of trap or poison, but the child simply began trying to clean his wounds with the gentleness of someone caring for an injured pet. "Does that hurt?" Billy asked, his young voice filled with genuine concern. My dad says water helps cuts heal better. Gorak stared at the small creature, in complete bewilderment. In Kethvar society, the wounded were either healed by their own strength or left to die as nature intended. The concept of one being caring for another without expectation of reward or dominance was utterly alien to him. This soft, defenseless child was showing kindness to an enemy who could crush him without effort. The paradigm shift had begun, though neither species fully understood it yet. 3 weeks had passed since the Kethvar arrived on Earth, and what should have been a simple conquest had turned into something completely unprecedented. General Thane paced the command center, like a caged predator, his massive claws scraping against the metal floor. Reports flooded in from every landing site, each more confusing than the last. His warriors, the most feared fighting force in the galaxy, were being systematically outmaneuvered by creatures they could crush with their bare hands. Commander Voss found himself questioning everything he had ever believed about strength and warfare. The humans fought unlike any enemy he had ever encountered. They didn't charge headfirst into battle seeking individual glory like honorable warriors should. Instead, they worked together in ways that seemed almost magical, coordinating attacks across vast distances and supporting each other with unity that defied Kethvar understanding. The confusion deepened when Captain David Miller of the Human Resistance made an unexpected contact under a white flag of truce. He requested a meeting with Commander Voss at neutral ground. Voss expected this to be the long-awaited surrender, the moment when human leadership finally acknowledged their obvious inferiority and begged for mercy. Instead, Captain Miller led him through the ruins of what had once been a shopping district, now converted into a makeshift medical facility. The sight that greeted Voss there shook him to his very core. Human doctors and nurses moved between rows of beds, treating wounded soldiers from both sides. Kethvar warriors lay next to human fighters, receiving identical care from medical staff who seemed to make no distinction between friend and enemy. Dr. Helen Carter has been working around the clock to save lives, Miller explained, gesturing toward a tired-looking woman in blood-stained scrubs. She's performed surgery on 17 of your people in the past week alone. Lost 2 hours of sleep each night because she refused to give up on a Kethvar warrior who everyone else thought was beyond saving. Voss watched in stunned silence as the human medic carefully adjusted the bandages on a wounded Kethvar scout. Her movements were gentle and precise, showing the same level of care she had given to the human soldier in the next bed. This violated everything Voss understood about the natural order. Why would the weak tend to the strong? Why would prey species show compassion to their predators? Your people heal our wounded, Voss said slowly, struggling to process what he was seeing. But we came here to conquer you. Wounded soldiers are just people in pain, Dr. Carter replied without looking up from her patient. It doesn't matter which side they fought on. My job is to heal, not to judge. The paradigm shift accelerated dramatically during an incident that would be remembered by both species for generations. Lieutenant Ryan Walsh, a young Marine from Texas, found himself trapped in a collapsed building with 3 Kethvar prisoners he had been escorting to safety. When enemy forces launched an attack on their position, Walsh made a split-second decision that no Kethvar could understand. A plasma grenade landed near their shelter, and Walsh threw himself directly onto it, using his own body to absorb the blast and protect the 3 alien prisoners. His sacrifice made no tactical sense to the Kethvar witnessing it. Why would a warrior give his life for enemies? Where was the glory in dying for creatures who represented a competing species? But the humans understood. They understood that Ryan Walsh had seen 3 living beings in danger and chose to protect them, regardless of the circumstances that had brought them together. His death wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about recognizing the value of life itself, even alien life. Back on the Kethvar homeworld of Morthak, younger warriors began asking uncomfortable questions. Scout Gorak, still haunted by his encounter with the human child Billy, stood before a war council and challenged General Thane's orders directly. The humans show us mercy when they could show us death, Gorak said, his voice carrying across the assembly hall. They tend our wounded when they could let us suffer. They sacrificed themselves to protect us when we came to destroy them. Perhaps we have misunderstood what makes a species truly strong. The hall erupted in angry voices. Elder warriors shouted about tradition and the natural order, They spoke of the weakness that compassion represented, and the danger of adopting the soft thinking of inferior species. But Gorak noticed something that chilled him. Many of the younger warriors remained silent, their expressions thoughtful rather than outraged. The seed of doubt had taken root in the Kethvar Empire, planted not by superior weapons or tactical brilliance, but by simple acts of human kindness that made no sense according to everything the aliens had ever believed about survival and strength. The cracks in the Kethvar Empire began small, like hairline fractures in ancient stone, but they spread with alarming speed across their vast civilization. For the first time in 3,000 years of absolute rule, Kethvar warriors were questioning orders, debating philosophy, and worst of all, refusing to follow the traditional path of conquest and domination. Commander Voss stood before the High Council on Morthak, his yellow eyes blazing with conviction as he addressed the assembly of elder warriors. The massive chamber, carved from volcanic rock and decorated with trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds, had never heard words like the ones he was about to speak. Honored elders, I have witnessed something on the human world that challenges everything we believe about strength, Voss began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. These creatures accomplish together what none of us could achieve alone. They lift each other up rather than tear each other down. They protect the weak instead of abandoning them. Perhaps we have spent 3 millennia misunderstanding the very nature of power itself. General Thane slammed his massive fist against the stone podium, the sound echoing like thunder through the chamber. You speak of weakness as if it were virtue. The humans are soft, pathetic creatures who will be crushed like all the others before them. Your mind has been poisoned by their influence. But Voss was not alone in his transformation. Scout Gorak stepped forward, joined by dozens of other warriors who had experienced direct contact with humans during the failed conquest. They carried with them recordings and testimonies that painted a picture radically different from what the High Council expected. Watch this, Gorak said, activating a holographic display that showed human soldiers sharing their food rations with captured Kethvar warriors. And this... The image changed to show a human child drawing pictures to entertain a wounded Kethvar scout in a medical facility. And this... The final recording showed Lieutenant Ryan Walsh sacrificing his life to save 3 Kethvar prisoners from a plasma grenade. The elder warriors watched in growing discomfort. These images made no sense according to their understanding of natural selection and survival. The strong were supposed to dominate the weak, not die protecting them. The victorious were supposed to take everything from the defeated, not share their resources freely. Young Kethvar warriors throughout the chamber began murmuring among themselves, their conversations growing louder and more heated. The rigid hierarchy that had governed their society for millennia suddenly seemed less absolute, less natural than it had before. If humans could find strength through cooperation rather than domination, what did that say about the Kethvar way of life? The rebellion began on the outer colonies first, in systems far from the watchful eyes of the High Council. On Kelos Prime, Kethvar garrison forces received orders to execute human prisoners taken during failed diplomatic missions. Instead, Commander Breck, a veteran of 40 successful conquests, stood before his troops and did the unthinkable. I will not execute defenseless prisoners, he announced. The humans have shown us a different way, and I choose to follow their example of mercy rather than our tradition of brutality. Half his forces supported him immediately. The other half, loyal to traditional Kethvar values, prepared to arrest him for treason. The colony erupted into civil conflict as Kethvar fought Kethvar for the first time in recorded history. On Earth, Marine Sergeant Bill Jackson found himself fighting alongside reformed Kethvar warriors against traditionalist forces that refused to accept the changing order. The sight of former enemies working together, sharing supplies and covering each other's retreat, spread hope throughout both species. 6 months ago, I was shooting at these guys, Jackson said as he helped bandage a wounded Kethvar ally. Now I trust them with my life more than some humans I've served with. Funny how things change when you actually get to know somebody. The reformed Kethvar, led by warriors like Voss and Gorak, began calling themselves by human-inspired names and adopting concepts that would have been unthinkable under the old system. They spoke of individual dignity, collective responsibility, and the radical idea that strength came from lifting others up rather than keeping them down. General Thane responded with increasingly desperate measures. Purges swept through the military ranks, targeting any warrior suspected of sympathizing with human values. Entire colonies were placed under martial law. Traditional ceremonies emphasizing dominance and individual power were made mandatory for all citizens. But the transformation had already gone too far to stop. The old ways, built on fear and absolute obedience, crumbled when confronted with an alternative that offered hope and mutual respect. Young Kethvar began secretly studying human culture, learning about concepts like democracy, human rights, and peaceful conflict resolution. The empire that had ruled the galaxy through brute force for 3,000 years was eating itself alive, torn between those who clung to the old ways and those who embraced a future they had learned from humanity. The final confrontation came not on Earth's surface, but in the cold vacuum of space above the blue planet that had changed everything. General Thane's remaining loyalist fleet hung in orbit like a collection of ancient monuments to a dying way of life, their dark hulls bristling with weapons designed for conquest rather than cooperation. Facing them was something the galaxy had never seen before, a combined human and Kethvar fleet. Former enemies now united by shared principles that neither species had fully understood just months earlier. Commander Voss, who now called himself Victor in honor of the human concept of victory through perseverance rather than domination, stood on the bridge of a retrofitted Kethvar cruiser. Beside him, Captain Linda Brooks of the Earth Defense Force studied the tactical displays with a calm professionalism that had become legendary among both species. The sight of human and Kethvar officers working side by side, sharing data and coordinating strategy, would have been impossible to imagine when the first alien ships descended from the sky. General Thane is broadcasting on all frequencies, reported Communications Officer Torres, a young human who had learned to operate Kethvar technology with remarkable speed. He's demanding that all Kethvar forces return to traditional command structure immediately. Victor's mandibles clicked softly, a sound that humans had learned indicated thoughtful consideration rather than aggression. He still doesn't understand. This isn't about choosing between human and Kethvar ways. It's about choosing between fear and hope. The battle that followed was unlike any conflict in galactic history. Traditional Kethvar tactics relied on overwhelming individual firepower and the assumption that enemies would break and flee when faced with superior force. But the combined fleet fought with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, human tactical flexibility merging seamlessly with Kethvar resilience to create something neither species could have achieved alone. Lieutenant Kevin Murphy, piloting a small human fighter craft, found himself protecting a massive Kethvar battleship whose shields had failed. The irony wasn't lost on him that 6 months earlier he would have been trying to destroy that same vessel. Now he threw his fragile ship between incoming fire and the alien crew he had come to consider family. "You're crazy, Murphy," came the voice of his wingman over the radio. "That ship weighs more than your entire hometown." "Yeah, but they got 300 people aboard," Murphy replied, his fighter weaving between plasma bolts. "And people are people, whether they got 2 legs or 6. The turning point came when General Thane made his final desperate gambit. Unable to accept that his worldview had been fundamentally challenged, he ordered his flagship's main weapon to target Earth's major population centers. It was an act of pure spite, the last thrashing of a dying philosophy that could only understand dominance and submission. But the weapon never fired. Chief Gunner Krell, a veteran of 50 conquests who had served Thane loyally for decades, stood at his post and refused the order. Around him, other crew members made the same choice, their hands moving away from their controls in silent rebellion. "I have seen human children tend to our wounded," Krell said quietly, his voice carrying through the ship's communication system. "I have watched their soldiers die to protect our people. I will not murder innocents in the name of a strength that has proven itself to be weakness." Thane's rage was terrible to witness, but ultimately powerless. His own crew, infected by the same transformation that had swept through the Empire, turned away from him. The great general who had conquered 47 worlds found himself alone on the bridge of his flagship, defeated not by superior weapons or tactical brilliance, but by the simple realization that his way of life had always been built on a foundation of fear. The ceremony that followed took place on neutral ground, aboard a specially constructed space station positioned between Earth and the Kethvar homeworld. Captain Rachel Foster, the newly formed human Kethvar diplomatic corps, worked alongside Victor to draft the Treaty of Terra, a document that enshrined principles both species had learned through their confrontation. We hereby establish that strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the willingness to lift them up, Victor read from the treaty, his words being broadcast across both civilizations. That true victory is achieved when former enemies become allies, and that the measure of civilization is not in what it conquers, but in what it protects. The signing was witnessed by representatives from dozens of other galactic species who had spent centuries living in fear of Kethvar expansion. They watched in amazement as the most feared empire in the galaxy voluntarily transformed itself into something unprecedented, a republic built on cooperation rather than conquest. 6 months later, the joint exploration vessel New Horizon launched toward the galactic rim, its crew a mixture of humans and Kethvar working together to explore unknown regions of space. Admiral Thomas Harrison and High Commander Victor stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars with hope rather than the hunger for conquest that had driven previous expeditions. The age of domination was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.